Today is going to be mostly like an informal conversation. My hope is to address your needs in terms of what tools you are are more interested on learning about. And then I'll do my best to try to explain them if I know how they work. If I don't, then I can research a little bit about them and then get back. I'll explain a little bit more how they work. Horizon has been releasing a lot of new tools that we can easily implement in our projects. And one of them is called NUX, and that is a short name for new user experience. And that basically is the solution if you want to address the onboarding phase of a player. Like if you want to show that player how the world works, how the controls work as well, that is something that you can easily implement. And I'm gonna demonstrate that right now. So let's say that a brand new user entered the world and then you want to show them, let's say, like instructions. Before this tool, what you will normally do is that you will have, let's say, like a billboard somewhere on the left side of on the world, and then that'll show the instructions to the player. But now we have a different way of addressing that. So let's see how that works. So I'm going to create a brand new script here. I'm going to call this one a Nux demo. And I am going to open that script. Okay. So let me increase the size here so you can see. Okay, so all I'm going to do here is that I'm going to use one of the new Nux tools when the player enters the world. So as a preference, I prefer to remove the HZ references in the code. After you get used to the Horizon APIs, I think that just adds more noise to the script and it's not really necessary to keep it. But basically what I'm going to do here is that restart, basically the method that runs before the simulation starts, I am going to subscribe to an event, in this case, when the player enters a trigger. So I'm going to say connect coblock event, and this is going to be this entity. And the event, as I mentioned, is going to be when the player enters trigger, player enters trigger, and that returns a player, basically the player that is entering the trigger. And with that information, I can start doing things with that player. For example, if I want to show them a message saying, kind of like a welcome message, I can do something like player and then show. When you start typing show, you're going to see all the new NUX or new user experience APIs. And the first one that we're going to be looking at is the one that says a toast message. So I'm going to select that one, and then I'm going to open parentheses. And the only thing that this API requires is the message and the duration. So for example, in this case, it's going to be welcome to the next demo. That's fine. Let's keep that. And something important to know is that this should be milliseconds, not seconds. So in this case, if I want this to last 5 seconds, I can say 5,000 milliseconds. Okay, so just like that, I am going to add a trigger here. This could be kind of like a trigger on the welcome area of the world. So I'm going to add a trigger here. Bring it over. And then maybe like a shape so that way we know where that trigger is. I always like to show the entire process that way. Maybe hopefully you can get like some tricks and on the creation process. So whenever you want to align something, this is one of my favorite things of the desktop editor. Whenever you want to align things that are like, completely off, something that I like to do first after I get the scale that I want is that I like to copy the position or rotation or scale. So if I right click on any of these properties, I can then select copy position in this case. And then I right click on the target entity and then I paste it. And then it's going to position that in the same center. And then I can just move it and then it's going to be completely aligned whenever I decide then to scale the entity. So after doing that, I am going to attach the script, which is this one. And let's see what happens. So now if I play the world, Now we get this nice pop-up message that looks really like tiny, like really like well positioned and on the screen of the player. Uh, by the way, this is something that is only available for mobile players. So the things about the NUX is mostly for mobile players. So something to know about this is that you can by all means use the formatting options that you are used to for text gizmos. For example, if I want to be this part, be bold, I can say bracket and then B. And then if I save that, then we're gonna have to wait until it compiles. And then if I enter the trigger again, now this part of the message is a little bit more bold, right? So one question that you might ask is like, why not to use the pop-up message instead, the pop-up API? I think that the benefit of using this one is that it offers a standardized format that you can then, leverage to keep the messaging of your game consistent. Like the pop-up message, sometimes it's kind of like hard to to position correctly on the screen. You have to to play with the vertical position and the size of it, whereas the NUX messages automatically adapt to the player's screen size. So that's why it's recommended to use that one. Just like we did with that pop-up message there, the other option that is available to us is a pop-up message that we can show above the controller. So for example, if I want to show the player, hey, this is the button that you want to use if you want to jump, literally it's as easy as just doing something like this. Player, show input action message. Then this one is going to take an input here that is going to be the player input action that I want to highlight. So player input action. And then in this case, I want to highlight the jump action, then comma, and then the message is going to be press to jump. Let's just do that. And then I am going to show this message for 5 seconds as well. That's fine. And then I'm going to save that. Go back to the console log here, wait until compiles, and then I enter. And then if I enter the trigger now, there you go. So now we have that pop-up there that appears, and you see how kind of like that bubbling message there that highlights that button. So again, like for example, if you have like a game, to have like different controllers, you can use this to show those messages on the screen to teach the player how to navigate through your game. And the last one is the one that actually shows a slide on the screen. So for that, I already, just to save time, I already have something prepared for that. So it's going to be this one right here. So to show the slide, you will normally do something like this. Let me show the entire process. So player, and then show, as I mentioned, everything that is NUX is under the show keyword here. And then I'm going to select the one that says show info slides. And what this takes is something called info slides. That's basically the type of information that it's expecting. So that's going to be something called slides, I'm going to call it. So now we need to create those slides. So I'm going to do that in here. I'm going to say const slides. As the API requires it, this should be an array, basically a list of all the different, information that you want to show to the player. And basically, that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to create an array. And I have to specify that there's going to be an info slide, an array, an array. Inside this list, then I am going to create the individual slides that I'm going to be presenting to the player. As a quick recommendation, if you don't know how to implement a specific API, Horizon is doing a great job documenting this functionality. For example, if I wanted to know what type of information I need to include in this slide information, all I need to do is just right click on the specific type of information that I want to get more details for, and then I can select go to definition. Also, you can just press Control with your keyboard and then click on the word itself, and that's going to take you to the documentation of it. So for example, these are all different options that we can include. We can include the title, the message, an image, and a style. So let's see how it works. So the first one is going to be the title. And there's going to be, let's just say welcome as well, the description. I'm just going to, just for the sake of time, I'm just going to accept what the AI is suggesting here. The description, these are demonstration of the Nux experience, system in Horizon, that's fine. Not so fast. We cannot do this yet, AI. So let's put a pin on this image recommendation here. This is not quite right. And let's see, description. And oh, there's another thing about the AI. Sometimes it suffers from hallucinations. So the API itself doesn't have something called descriptions. The API actually has something called message. So that's what we need to put in here. The image here, we don't have that. We have something called image URI. And then the last one is something called styles that we're going to keep here. And that basically what we need to put in here is if we want where we want to show the image on that message. And I'll show you in a second what that means. So for now, I'm just gonna comment that out so we can see the differences. And for the image URI, actually, instead of including, website, which is not allowed as far as I know, what we need to put in there is the asset ID of the texture that you want to display in that slide. So I already have one uploaded here as a demo. So I'm gonna go to my asset library. And it's just like a simple, literally just like image. And then I'm gonna put that asset ID here in the image URI. And then I am going to save that. Okay, so after that, the slide is created. And then I say, hey, when the player enters the trigger, show that slide to the player. Let's see how it looks. So if I go here now, play the world, and then I enter the trigger, there it is. It looks weird right now because I have all these panels already open, but this is how the presentation looks like. If I had more slides, then we will see like a next button that will then show us the next information. But then after I press let's go, then the player, is released and they can move around. The option that we have here for the attaching image to header is that if we enable that and then we say true, and then if I save that, let's wait for it to compile. There you go. We have two of them. Now, if I go back to the world and then I enter the trigger, now the image is part of the header of the presentation here. When this, by the way, when this is visible to the player, they cannot move around, they cannot do anything. They have to actually accept the presentation so they can continue in the world. If you are wondering, that presentation doesn't trigger the focus interaction events. I already tried that. So I guess that there isn't like an easy way of knowing when that panel is open or closed. It's something that you have to basically determine based on player movement. That's the reason why I prefer to have a trigger for it, because I know that, for example, when the player enters that trigger, then I have to present that information to the player. And then if they walk away, then I know that the presentation is basically is over. Any question there before I move on to the next topic? That is only for mobile. Yeah, exactly as Craig mentioned, you can always use traditional, tools for VR as well. Horizon has mobile first focus at the moment, so many of the tools that we're going to be reviewing today are mostly focused on mobile development, but there's always a workaround for VR players. Okay, no questions there. So the next one is another one that has been requested a lot, and is the ability of like getting the player's headshot, like the player's face. And for that, I have a public asset that you can use. So if you go to the public asset library here and then you filter by my name, Pigeon number 12. Then I have this one here called Avatar Expressions, and it's just like a demo of how the API works. Of course, this might most likely will not be the final implementation, but you can by all means copy the code and implement it however you like. So I'm gonna place it here in the world, and then I'll explain how it works. And I am going to rotate it 0 degrees. Before I test it, know that for this API in particular, in order to work, you have to leave and come back into a world. So I'm gonna do that. Give me just 1 second to do that. I'm gonna shut down the server. By the way, we have this function now that we can end the session. I use that a lot, so I'm just gonna do that now. And let me do that. All right, so now that we are back in here, the way how this one works in particular is that if I enter this station here, I am able to see the faces of all the players that are in the world. Since I'm alone here, I can only see mine. But then when I click on the face of those players, then their expression, changes to different images here. So I have a angry, like a sassy one, and happy, sad, and there you go, celebration. So yeah, you can use this for many use cases. I think that someone mentioned that they were creating like a cell phone or something, and then you will see like the faces of everybody in the world, and then you can just call them or teleport to them, when you see their faces in there. You can, of course, use it to create your own leaderboard in the world. And then, if imagine, for example, if a player is losing or something, you can change their expression in here to create kind of like that dynamic in the world. And this, by the way, is just a simple custom UI. So you can personalize the squares to be circles and all of that. So the only requirement here is that according to the documentation, the API that retrieves that information must be running locally. So if I hover over here, the custom UI is actually running locally. The trigger, the function of the trigger is in this example, is that when the player enters the trigger, the ownership of the custom UI is transferred to that player, and that's how they're able to interact with the custom UI. So if I look at the code of that, if I open that real quickly, then there's basically all the different expressions that we can use: happy, sad, angry, teehee. I didn't know that that was a word. Congrats, shocked, and waving. And as you can see, the code is really short. The most of the code is just like to create a custom UI, but the API itself, and it's basically when I press the button here, this is all it's doing. Basically, just like iterating through that list of different expressions and then updating an image using the image source API. This is the new thing, image source, and then from player avatar expression. And this basically what it takes is a player that you want to affect, or the information, the player from where you get that you want to display in that image, right? And then what expression you want to get from that image. This was kind of like surprising a little bit, the fact that this requires local scripting in order to work, especially if you're retrieving the images from a different player. In my head, that doesn't make too much sense, but that's how the API actually works. If you try to use this on the server side, I think that works partially a little bit, but the API, let's see, if I click on it, I think it says it somewhere in here. There you go, right here. Only works on client, make sure the custom UI panel and script is local. So that's a gotcha moment there that you need to be aware of. Okay, so let's see what you have in the comments. Nice, I see some movement here. So let's say, this will be great for a quick gameplay tutorial. Okay, yes, I'm guessing that you're talking about the NUX tools. Yes, that's precisely how the importance of it, especially since the onboarding process normally is what tends to be confusing for new players, especially for new players that are completely new to Horizon platform at all, right? Like they don't even know how to jump, they don't even know how to move around. So if you are able to provide, to compensate for that limitation using the NUX tools, you're gonna be, ahead in the game. Can I set up my slides so they are local and function independently for each player? Um, Well, you shouldn't have to. Yes, I mean, yes, but the script doesn't have to be local. What you can do there is that you can say something like, well, let me go a step back a little bit there. So when you present the information to the player, you do have to specify the player. So the slides are actually already local to the player. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're asking, or I don't know if maybe you want to, even if you want to display a specific information into the, for that player, you can, for example, in the message, make it dynamic. For example, you can say, welcome to the NUX demo, comma, and then here you can concatenate the player. So player name get, and that'll make it personalized for that player in particular, right? So, but yeah, you do need the player anyway. So the information that a player is seeing will not affect what the other player is actually observing if they're in a different stage of the game. Let's see, we got the shutdown server. Yeah, I was so excited to see that. That's great. Although it is very similar to returning to creation home and coming back, but it makes me feel secure in knowing the server was fully shut down. Yeah, actually, that's a good point. In fact, the reason why that tool exists is because before, I don't know if that's still true, but before going to the island, that's basically the home, going to the island and returning to the edit mode will actually make you return to the same edit instance. So that's the reason why that button exists. It's just to make sure that all the sessions are completely closed before you return. Also, it's very beneficial when you are working with others. Sometimes someone might just walk away from their headset or the computer, and they might just be, their avatar might just stay there forever. I am famous for that. Sometimes when I'm done with a session, for example, sometimes I forget where I left my avatar parked. So my, my avatar might stay in one of your sessions like forever. But now with Shutdown the server, you can kick anyone out from your edit session. Cray is saying that the local confuses me a lot. My brain is not braining it. Yeah, definitely the local scripting is kind of like one of those things that you have to, the more you practice it, then the more you're going to get used to it. But generally speaking, you should be okay just using server scripting for mostly everything, unless you want something that is to run super smooth for a specific player or just because the API requires it. Okay, yeah. Let me know, Rocio, if you have any like follow-up questions on that. Yeah, we can definitely personalize that by player. And then, yeah, exactly. Proto, yeah, the shutting down the server kicks the collaborators out of the edit session. So yeah, that's another way of like cleaning your server and making sure that everything is running smoothly. All right, let's see. So another big one here is world persistent variables, y'all. We have finally that tool available to us, and we are able to create world persistent variables. So I guess that the best way to describe it, I am going to rely on something that actually, let me go back there. If you actually, well, let me see, how will be the best way of presenting this for you? I guess I can go ahead and demonstrate it real quick. So world persistent variables are created very similar in the same way how you create persistent variables today. You go to the system menu here, variable groups, and then you go ahead and create your variable group as normal. If you already have one, you don't have to do this, but just for this, in this case, I'm gonna create one, MHCP presentation, or yeah. And then I'm gonna create it, I'm gonna add it to the world. And here's where the magic happens. You can click on the plus sign here. And when you do that, then we have a new drop down here where you can select world persistent variables. And in this case, I am going to maybe, for this demo, I'm going to create one that captures the number of likes of a world. So I'm gonna call this one maybe likes. And then the type in this case is gonna be a number and the initial value is gonna be 0. So I'm gonna save it. Here you go. And then for the likes, it's just gonna be maybe like, do we have like a, let me see if we have a button here that we can use. Button, and then I guess we can use maybe this one, emergency one. There you go. And then we can rotate that 180 degrees. And then we can maybe put a trigger in here. Then when I press the trigger, then it increases the number of likes of the world. So now I'm gonna add a new script. I'm gonna call this one world PP. How should we call them now? WPPV, I guess. Is a well, no, world persistent variable. So WPV, I guess. Demo. There you go. I think that charts. That's how charts is calling them now. WPV. All right. So after we go here, add the process again. I prefer to remove the alias here. Just a personal preference, but if you're used to HZs, by all means, just keep using it if you want to, but I highly recommend you to avoid using that. You're saving also, a scripting space if you want to use that argument. But in this case, I'm just gonna say this, sorry, pre-start, I'm gonna start a subscription, and there's gonna be this connect call-block event. There's gonna be this entity, and the call-block event that I'm gonna connect is player enters trigger. Enter trigger. And this is going to return a player. Not that we need it now because we're going to be saving it in the world anyways. So the way how this works, there are several new APIs that we can use to interact with world persistent variables. And to that, let me bring a summary that I made earlier. So that is going to be, I think I have it here. And this one here. So let me copy this. I'm going to put it up here as a cheat sheet. This one. Okay, so these are all the new APIs that we have available now. Let me comment this. Okay, so we have these two. These two are basically to set the world persistent variables. And when we set those two, when we use these two APIs, we set the value and we also get the updated value in return. Let's see a demo how that works. So in this case, since I'm counting the number of likes, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to say, at this world, persistent storage, but in the API that you've been using so far, the persistent storage alone, but now we have persistent storage world. That's where all the new APIs are. When I press period, I get all these new APIs now available. So in this case, I am going to use increment counter async. When we do this, now we need to specify the key. And just like before, we have to specify the group name and followed by a column and then the variable name. I'm going to replace that in a second, just as placeholder. And then there's something new that we didn't have before. Normally for player persistent variables, we have to first get the current value of the player persistent variable, and then to that value, we add something to it, basically to recalculate it. Let's say, for example, if you have, let's say 10 points, right? We first say, get the 10 points, and then to those 10 points, add something else. With world persistent variables, it happens automatically, so we don't have to do all those extra calculations. All we have to do is basically specify for how much that value is changing. So in this case, I am going to say that it's going to be just by 1 that is changing. Then I need to replace these placeholder values here, the group name and the variable name. So the group name needs to match exactly what the group name is. So if I go back here to the system menu and then variables group, the group name is this. I'm just gonna copy it so that way I don't make any misspelling errors here. Going back here, the group name, replace it. And then the variable name as well, we need to replace it. And it's just likes. Okay. Okay, likes. There you go. And again, I always encourage you to get used to understanding how to basically getting used to learn on your own how an API works. So if we hover over this API, we notice that this is a promise. And what that means that in this case is returning a number. So this basically gives us in return what is the total number of likes that the world has after we make the change. So for example, in this case, I'm going to say then, and then it's going to be updated, so return likes, I guess. Then when that happens, I am going to, let's say, maybe console log that so we can see what is the total amount. So it's going to be console log, and then I'm going to say the world has that number of likes. Cool. So now I'm going to save that. I'm going to maybe, hopefully this is not too small. I'm trying to fit everything in the screen. Maybe like that. Okay, so after we have that, then I can then assign that to a trigger. So I'm gonna put that in a trigger. Again, using the trick of copying the position, then pasting the position here. Then it's easier to maneuver that way. And then I'm gonna make this one selectable on screen so it looks like a button. Okay, cool. And then I'm gonna attach the demo there. Okay, so I'm not quite sure if this is gonna be like the player persistent variables where we have to leave and come back into a world to make it work, but let's see. So if I play the world now, and then I click here, okay, yeah, it has 1 likes, 2 likes, and so on. So, however, you probably will not believe me until I demonstrate this that actually works across multiple instances. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm just gonna launch this, and I am going to like the world from the preview version. And then I'm going to go back to the desktop editor and see how that changes. So right now in the desktop editor, if I like the world, I see here that I have already 3 likes. Then I am going to switch to here, to this demo. And I am going to like from here, from the published version as well. I didn't have a pop-up or anything, so I'm just like liking the world many times. And then when I go back to the desktop editor now, the last time that I did it here, it had 3 likes. But now if I go back and then like the world now I have 11 likes because, I like the world 11 times in the published version. So you can see here how this information is being synchronized across multiple instances. Any questions before I continue? Yes, we have world persistent variables. Finally, yes, so excited to use it. There are so many possibilities and amazing things that we can do with this tool for sure. This is cool being able to use world persistent variables. Yes, this is definitely a game changer. I think that the most common use case for this is going to be creating your own leaderboards. And yeah, on that note, this is the easiest implementation of world persistent variables. As I mentioned, there are other APIs. The other one that works very similar to that one is this one called set world variable across all instances async. And this is basically for objects type data. So for example, let's say like if you, um, I would highly discourage of creating like long list of players in world persistent variables. Eventually, that's just gonna make your scripts like super low performant. And imagine, for example, it's like you start like storing like, players scored, and then your world has like 10,000 visits, right? Like, for example, it doesn't make sense to keep track of all the players in the world like that. Ideally, you want to use a world persistent variables in conjunction with player persistent variables. Like by all means, you probably want to keep track of, let's say, like the top 10 players in the world. And then whenever someone scores a higher value, then you compare against the current list. You remove the player that is no longer in the top 10, and then you place the new one there. Right. So that's basically the caveat that I want to mention here about using objects variables is that don't use that as a large database that could potentially eventually just make your world unable for players to visit it. and then you will have a lot of issues there. So let's see, maybe we can see a quick example. I think I already have one there. Let me just go to that world. So just for the sake of time, we can see how it works. Okay, so in this example, basically is what I think would be kind of like a more approximate scenario of how, this tool could be used. And it's basically just to keep track, let's say, of teams. Imagine, for example, let's say like if you're creating, let's say like a large exploration world where you have, let's say like different teams, like casts, like a different, like ones could be like monsters team and the other one could be like the humans team and the other one could be like the animals teams and stuff like that. I think that the world persistent variable would be great for that because then you can keep track like across multiple instances. If let's say like a team has more like 32 players, beyond the maximum capacity of a world, you can now keep track of, let's say, like 100 players that belong to the same team across multiple instances here, right? So what I'm doing in this example is that whenever I cross with let me raise this up a little bit so you can see. Whenever I pass through one of these goals, for each one of these individual teams, then the value should increase. I think I have it that increases every 5 seconds. Oh, that's another recommendation. You don't want to retrieve this data or set this data every time that something changes. You probably want to retrieve data, player persistent variable, world persistent variable, at a set interval. That's how the current leaderboards work today, and that is intended for that reason. You don't want to keep querying this information from the server very frequently. If I look at the code of this demonstration, that is going to be in the ball script here. What I have here is an interval that on every 5 seconds, I then retrieve those persistent values from the world persistent variable storage, and then I display that on the test gizmo. 5 seconds here is being conservative. I think that maybe if you do it like every 2 seconds should be fine, but I would be very careful if you go lower than that, especially if you start like saving a lot of data in that word persistent variable, right? You only want to do that every so often so the player is informed of what the current value is, but you don't want to keep it, like live. You don't want to do that every so often. So yeah, so this is an example of how the the JSON data will look like in the case of player persistent variable. What I'm doing here is that I am, see, when the trigger is entered by an entity, what I'm doing here is that I'm basically increasing the number of goals that have been like, scored in the session. Then I have two teams, A and B. I have my data structure already here saying like all I'm storing in that data structure is team A and then a number and then team B and then a number. And then whenever I score that, depending if it's the first trigger or the second trigger, then I set the score for those players. And then I save that using the set world variable across all instances async. That is important to know, and I guess that I'm going to mention that now just because it's not clearly specified or described in the documentation, is that we have all these APIs. We have these two, increments, counter async, and set world variable across all instances async. And what this does is that it sets and retrieves the information live across all instances in that world. The reason why I'm emphasizing that is because in contrast, we have these two APIs down here called get world variable and get world counter. The difference between these two and these ones is that this one will only give you the information of the current instance, the last known value of the current instance. This will not give you the information across all instances. So this is great if you have to conduct repetitive information about the same variable, but this is better if you want to keep the player informed about what is happening across all instances in the world. And similar to this one, if you absolutely have the need of getting the current value across all instances, this is what you would use, get world variable async. Okay, I'm gonna pause there. Let's see if we have any questions. Can I use this to random spawning to ensure that an entity is unique each time I go into preview? Or let me see, let me read the question again. So Samsung is asking, I can use this to randomize spawning to ensure that an entity is unique each time I go into preview or runtime. I'm not quite sure if I know if I'm following what you're asking there, but yeah, I don't know if you can clarify that question. For randomize, for spawning in general, if it's if it's something that affects only that player, I will definitely use player persistent variable instead. But if it's something, let's say, like if you want, let's say, like the arrangement of the spawning entities, if you want that arrangement to be reflected in a different instance, for example, then yeah, you will use word persistent variable in that case. But I will be very careful about the amount of information that you store in there, right? Because you're probably going to need to know like the entity ID, the position, and the rotation. So you just want to optimize your data storage structure there to make sure that you don't overload the, the persistent variable. Craig is asking, what do you think the max should be, for a list? I don't think we have enough information to calculate that right now. I would say that is gonna be pretty much like world dependent. Definitely, I'm one of those people that I like to stress test every time that there is a new API just to make sure that I know what the limits are. I haven't done that yet with world persistent variables, but definitely try it. Uh, but before you do that, I always, again, encourage creators to analyze if there is a more optimized way of achieving what you're trying to do, and if it's something that most likely is a player persistent information, or if it should absolutely be a world persistent data. He's asking, I know you said, for example, top 10 players, but what will be your best advice on max number? I want to say, again, it's really dependent. Let me show you an example. For example, here, if I were to store only data like this, like a score data, and let's say I have like 100 teams, I think that that should be okay. I would be like a stress testing a little bit there. But if the data structure is a little bit more complicated, let's say, for example, if I say something like, if I create a new one, a new type structure that looks like a team composition, for example, and then I say that team A, and then I have here like a list of players, for example, uh, uh, player names, say strings or something. String, string. Here you go. This could get long pretty fast, right? So it could be like a lot of data that you're gonna be saving here in the player persistent variable. So I will definitely discourage from doing something like this because that's precisely what the type of things that happen that eventually our worlds are stop working without knowing why. If you do want to pursue something like this, definitely stress test it. Like just toss like 1,000 names in there, like 10,000 strings in there to see if the world doesn't break, if you're still able to go to the world and retrieve that data. But definitely just be mindful that we don't want to overload that capacity. And Orderly Order is saying, this looks like a great way to have a community voting hub. Yes, absolutely. That's a perfect example of how this tool could be used. For example, imagine, let's say that you are trying to decide what should be the next upgrade of your world. Like you're trying to decide if you want to create, let's say, like a store, if you want to decide to create a, like, I don't know, like a hangout area, you can implement like a voting system in your world and then basically have the world persistent variable remembering the votes of every visitor in the world. Of course, you probably want to, again, work that out a little bit in conjunction with the player persistent variable because you want to avoid players voting more than once. But you can definitely just, have maybe like a true or false variable on the player side to track if that player already voted. And only if they haven't voted, then you affect the results in the word persistent variable side of things. But yeah, orderly order, that's a great example of how to use the word persistent variables. let's see, I think that those are the three major ones. I had a list here. We also have LLMs, basically the ability of having NPCs interacting with players in the world through voice. We currently don't have the ability of speaking to a AI, but we can definitely get information back from them. For that, I highly encourage you to take a look at the different examples that Horizon has here in the asset library. So for example, if I open the computer friend here, and then I move this up a little bit. By the way, shout out to also to Mike the Guru and King of Miami. They have also created their own version of the M's. I think that even before Horizon released theirs. So definitely something to check it out. So this one in particular, the reason why I like this one is because the computer, I don't know if you can see it there, but the face or the avatar of the computer mouth changes according to what they're saying, and all that because of the features that we have available with the LLM's APIs. So if I go here into the scripting side of things, and then I go to computer friend, which is this example, we can see how this is actually working. Uh, the core behind all of this is using the MPC API. Currently, it's read like that because probably the API is disabled. So you can activate an API by going into the scripting menu here, and then settings, and then API, and then you can enable the API if it's not already on. And by using that API, you get access to a ton of features. In this case, this is being used to, whenever the API is talking to you or talking to a player, it'll emit or inform the script what is basically the position of their mouth, right? What would be the position, and then you can use that to present a texture or an animation that represents that pronunciation. That's what basically this is doing. If you want to learn more about what all the different features are available inside of this API, as always, I always encourage you to right click on things, then go to definition, or you can just control and click. It'll take you to the definition of things. And the one that we're looking for in particular is the one that is under, let me find it, under conversation. You can get information about, like you can command the NPC to say something, to speak. You can tell it to stop speaking. You can basically ask the API to produce an audio file or audio based on instructions. And the way how this works is that this output is going to be dependent on the personality of that NPC. And again, just because we're running out of time here, the way how you can configure the personality of an NPC or the AI in this case is that when you add the gizmo to a world, NPC, like so, you can then change it to be only the AI speech. And when you do that, you get access to this button here that says edit character. And here's where you can then specify the personality traits of that AI agent or AI NPC. In this case, I'm going to call it Sappy. And then in here, that'll give you access then to a fields where you can then specify the personality of that AI NPC, the constraints, the guarders here that we can say basically things that the AI NPC should avoid. You can also practice conversation with the AI NPC here, and you can also personalize the voice of that NPC. There are limited number of options here. I was joking with someone that I hope we get the Snoop Dogg voice here sometime, just like we have it in the messenger, I think it is. But you can always play with the speed and the speech and all of that if you want to take it a step further. So let's see. We're gonna read the comments here real quick to just make sure that we have any questions. Okay, great, saying thank you. That really helped me understand more. I definitely will be testing this a bit for sure. I'm very curious. Yeah, definitely I encourage exploration and play through things. That's how you learn how to use things most of the time. Just like playing with it until you break it. Just make sure that you play with things in a sandbox world. Uh, Definitely not in your live world, just in case, something breaks and then, yeah, then you lose access to it. And then Aurelio is saying maybe have them have to buy or earn coins in order to vote. Yep, that's another great idea. Mike Deguri is saying cannot wait for the full LLM functionality. I can already tell they are going to be one of my favorite tools. Definitely, that's something that is going to increase the immersion on a game, especially for those times where the player is on their own. Having this functionality definitely helps, the player and increases retention, in my opinion. Gray saying, I love creating their character. I have my gray aliens and robots all talking with their different personalities. It is pure craziness and chaos. Yep, that definitely super fun to play with it. How about a parrot voice? I think we have one, don't we? I think we have a parrot somewhere. Well, I guess we have the cartoonish wizard. Ice. Oh, there you go. Cartoonish pirate right here. Yeah, we do have the cartoonish pirate voice. Is AI available for Canadians? Great question. I think it is, but not all regions. I think, please, if someone knows, please let me know. But I do believe that AI is available for Canadians, most regions, I think. There are certain countries that is not available yet for legal reasons because the legal, environment of that particular country might prevent the use of AI technologies. Meta is constantly updating that list of countries, but I'm fairly certain that it's available for Canada. So yeah, definitely check that out. The best way for you to know if you have it available is literally just go to the desktop editor. And then if you have, let's see, I'm gonna cancel this one here. If you close, if you are able to see this, the Gen AI tools, then yeah, you do have access to the AI tools. And Samsung is asking, can we use the feature in the current competition? I would say yes. This is available for everybody. Although, you know what? I will definitely ask about that because if AI is restricted for certain regions, I wonder if that's a limitation for the competition, although I don't think so. But just to be on the safe side, since I'm not part of that team that determines the rules of the competition, definitely ask in the forum or ask in the Discord if you're a part of the Discord, just to be on the safe side. I want to say yes, but just make sure to ask just in case. That's a great question. Okay, I think that we are at time, but as always, if you have any follow-up questions about this, feel free, just to ping me in any of the corresponding channels, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. And let me share the link here of the survey real quick. If you can do me a favor and complete this survey, that is going to help the team understand if this type of content is useful for you or not, and if the program should adjust the framework of these presentations. I appreciate you all for attending this session today. I hope this is useful and I cannot wait to see and play test all your creations. And good luck with the competition for all of you that are participating on this one.